name is Conor. I am a PhD researcher at the University of Kent in Canterbury in the politics department. I am Irish / Northern Irish / British, depending on who you ask, and come from Belfast. I needed to find shoes because I was going away for a conference or something like this, and this was all I could get that I didn't hate, because they're black and plain and they're not too loud, which is what my replacement shoes are kind of like as well. I got a really similar pair because I don't like clothes that are too loud. I spent some time in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, Thailand and Malaysia for a few weeks in winter 2015. So yeah, that would have been the furthest from home, which is interesting because the shoes were actually made in Indonesia. So I kind of brought them closer to where the real home is, if you like, than where I actually purchased them. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to think about in terms of like the connectedness of global supply chains and the conditions in which these shoes were likely to be made. As the past year or so, I've seen a lot of changes in my own personal life, and I've moved city. I moved to Canterbury in September 2015, started a PhD, met a lot of amazing people, went to some really interesting places I was lucky enough to do. Well, sometimes I'm usually quite late for things in the morning. So oftentimes I don't even have time to tie up the laces, so I'll just throw them on, and that's why they're ripped in places, because I've done that so much. But in terms of what I'm looking forward to in the day, my day-to-day life is very boring. My day-to-day life is in a library, reading and writing, 5 days out of 7 at least. And that's not a complaint, it's a privilege and a joy to be doing that. But my excitement when I'm putting on the shoes and starting a new day is just, for me, the joy I get, or the happiness I get from what I do in my life, is a sense in which I'm participating in something that's long term, that I can contribute to the projects I'm involved with other people, and my own personal project that are sort of projected into the future. And there's this sense in which, with that eye on the future, it helps you get up in the morning. And then on the days where that sort of like sense of excitement or confidence in what it is that I'm doing sort of dwindles, those days I might not even put on the shoes. Those days I might just stay at home. Some of the special things, or things that struck me, were, and this kind of takes the conversation in a different direction, were, for example, the presence of military recruitment in the centre of Canterbury. I know this is curious, but for example, where I come from, when you walk down the main street, if you were to see a military recruitment agency or whatever, that would be quite a contentious political and controversial thing to be present in the high street. It wouldn't be normal. Whereas in Canterbury, it's totally normalised. And it's just intriguing to me to see how the relationship to the state, or the relationship to the military, or whatever it is, kind of really alters from place to place. And yeah, in my experience in Canterbury, that's an experience I wouldn't have had if I had walked in these shoes in Belfast, where I'm from. And this I guess this goes back to my upbringing in Belfast, where community divisions are quite strong and remain so, between the predominantly Catholic Irish identifying population and the predominantly Protestant British identifying population. That's not news to anyone. But what maybe isn't quite as well known is that the school systems, for example, are still quite divided. I lived the first 18 years of my life in Catholic education because it's still religiously divided. There are a couple of mixed schools, but the vast majority of people my age didn't have a friend who was from the other side, so to speak, until they were at university. And it profoundly impacts how you relate to the other in your community, whatever the other is, if you don't have any friends when you're growing up who are from different backgrounds. And I don't necessarily blame, because I lived in an area that was kind of mixed and was a bit dodgy, let's say. There was a couple of interface points, not of the very violent type that there are in other parts of Belfast, but there were some meeting points. And when you walked home from school in your Catholic uniform, there was a sense of unease and anxiety, and your parents would be worried and so on. I'm not for a second saying it was a war zone, but there was definitely a sense of anxiety and unease. And every child in that area will have stories about being chased or being beaten up as a kid and so on. It's totally normal. And I guess when I came to university in Belfast, where I studied my undergraduate degree, and that division was suddenly just not relevant anymore in classrooms and in walking around the city centre and within university campus life generally. It heightened that sense in which how much we lost by not being together earlier, basically. And that brought out that feeling that I had never really had before, I admit, of what it might be like to be in a Protestant working class family, living in a predominantly Catholic area, for example. That would not be a comfortable experience for these people. And that was something that hadn't quite crystallized to my mind before I actually was friends with and talked with and socialized with people from the other side. And that was an important experience for me. And one of the things I think people need is, very broadly speaking, a sense of purpose in their own existence, that their own life matters and what they are doing in the world matters somehow. We might just call this work. By work I do not mean labour. I do not mean a 9-to-5 necessarily. I mean work in the sense of something that you have to take care of in your life and cultivate over a long period. As far as I can see, having long-term projects, having a sense of purpose and excitement about what one is doing in the world, whether it's a vocation, whether it's a profession, or whether it's raising a family. Obviously it doesn't have to be about productivity, but about a sense of personal and communal purpose. And so for that reason I would include into that things like love and care. Seem to be really important and increasingly dwindling and increasingly inaccessible in the highways of everyday life. But nonetheless, I think that what Europe has done is opened up a space to allow sort of like real cross-cultural learning in an atmosphere of peace to take place, very broadly speaking. Though the worry is that who does it exclude in order to do this? And who does it exclude? I mean, it excludes anyone outside of Europe, or it makes it much more difficult for anyone outside of Europe. I remember seeing a statistic the other day where it took passports and looked at the levels of mobility that are related to certain passports, and it's very interesting. I mean, I think actually Germany is the most mobile passport in the world, I believe. A close second to another European country I can't recall, but the least mobile passport in the world was Afghanistan. But what you see here is a very clear example of the differential distribution of the privilege of mobility. And the thing is, it's a real important question for us in terms of how do we construct a world in which people can actually build long-term projects together and try and create and sculpt better worlds. Because I think the referendum's done now. I think my current position is as a lot of people's, is that the vote should be honoured in whatever way that might look. My personal hope for it is that we can have as progressive a government as possible to lead that negotiation, to make sure that the people who are going to be hurt most by the way the current rhetoric is going don't face those types of exclusionary practices. So yeah, my fear is that we won't get the right people to negotiate this, and at the moment I'm not very optimistic that we'll get the right people. So yeah, the fear is great in terms of how much this exclusionary and racist atmosphere is allowed to grow further than it already is, because it's already way beyond. The way in which I try and live my life is through, as much as possible, putting myself in situations that push me to limits that I haven't pushed before. And it's, as I've mentioned a couple of times, it's a real privilege to ever get the possibility to even do that. And for the next couple of years, while I'm still doing this PhD, I have that privilege, and I'm trying to grab it with both hands. And what will come after that, I really don't know. So trying to find that balance between some stability and comfort with moments of experimentation is how I would imagine I would like to live my life, but whether or not I achieve that, that's not for me to assess, I guess. But I'm trying. Material traces in terms of text and literature is the most obvious thing that I'm engaged in on a daily basis, because I see that as all I do every day is engage with traces of other people's existence. And that might be a biography, that might be a philosophical book, that might be a journal article, or whatever. I mean, pictures or traces. And leaving traces like that behind and seeing what people can do afterwards is an exciting thought to me, but precisely because you have no idea what people are going to do with the traces you leave behind. To try and make my own stuff as open as possible to allow for that is kind of what I'm trying to do. Make the processes and arguments that I make open enough to allow other people to bend them in new ways and create new things out of them. You know, this is my sort of like imagined dream of how I would love my work to be. It is a fantasy, but I think people are allowed their fantasies. Otherwise, obviously the traces you leave are emotional and reproductive, maybe, traces of your existence. That's not a question. I don't know if I am ready to answer the question whether or not I want to leave future generations here of Heaney's. I don't know if the word needs any more. But certainly the imprints of the relationships and friendships and micro communities that I've been lucky enough to be a part of, if we can leave some trace of the good things we've done together, then that's enough for me, I think. What I would hope for people to understand or capture about the way I'm trying to move about my own life is basically that I mean what I'm saying, I'm committed to what I'm saying, and that I'm trying to be as genuine and as open as possible with that. I can answer that in a couple of different ways. Geographically, in the shoes, I imagine much of the same. I imagine much of the same sort of life. I can imagine those sorts of like repetitive patterns being repeated again and again and again. I wouldn't want that to change. You know, in terms of my work, where I can go next, I'm very open about that. I'm actually keen not to decide in advance where I might end up, because so far in my PhD project, and I have a wonderful supervisor he's been, you know, he's made the mistake of allowing me some creative freedom, and I've been exploring ideas and theories that I didn't expect to be exploring and investigating, and it's been extremely exciting for me to just allow imprints from other people to emerge in my own work, and so a certain openness seems to me important in that regard. Okay.